Hello, friends. Welcome again to the University of Dice. I wanted to delve into this thing with actions a bit more after I discussed it recently in the video where I talked about control teams. Because the best and worst of actions might be a little bit of a misnomer because I would argue that it goes a lot more towards worst than it does best. But nonetheless, I think it's important to look at this and understand what's going on with action cards in Dice Masters. Not just basic actions, but a lot of non-basic actions as well. Let's look a little closer. I talked about this burden of interaction in my recent control video. I've taken off the aggro and control labels because that could muddy the waters. Really, the point of this and the important part of it is that Dice Masters primarily has two types of cards that are good. You have your cards that offer quick and accessible, but temporary effects. And you have your cards that offer slow, as in a lot of setup required, but persistent effects. And actions are a problem because they're often not cleanly in either of these boxes, and in fact often take the worst from each of the two. Let's take this as an example. The Blackbird Global and the Human Paladin ability, they have some similarities, similar to what one another do. So Blackbird has a global that allows you to pay any energy, right? Just a basic nothing energy. And it makes a global ability unusable until the start of your next turn. You can only do that once per turn, but that's fine. So you could turn off a global ability, such as, say, a force attack. Human Paladin, on the other hand, makes it so that none of your stuff in the field can be affected by global abilities used by your opponent. So what's the difference here? Well, Blackbird uses the energy. It's a global ability. It's limited. It's temporary, but it's accessible whenever you want it there. Whereas Human Paladin, I have to buy him. He has to go into my bag. He has to roll, and then I can field him. Assuming I can pay the fielding cost, not really a burden with him with a grand total of on the TFC of 2. Now this is a clean example because these cards are similar, but let's look at another example, a basic action card. Shield. It says your character dice cannot be targeted by opposing abilities or action dice, global abilities rather, or action dice until the beginning of your next turn. Very similar to what Human Paladin does, except it's temporary. So this card does something like what these two do, but whereas, say, Human Paladin saw a ton of play, we never really saw a lot of shield at any point. Why? Well, obviously different metas and whatever else, but let's consider, too, that shield does what Human Paladin does, plus maybe even a little more, but it has all of the setup of Human Paladin, because you got to buy it and roll it, but then it's a temporary effect like Blackbird. Again, this is a clean example because these cards are similar. You can make other comparisons for other cards in other metas. This just drives the point home because the abilities have some similar end results. Now, that's not to say that everything is bad. There have been action cards that have been quite good, in fact. But they're good because, well, for one, they're persistent. Imprisoned is fine because it's an ongoing effect. You capture those things, they stay captured until the condition on the card is met. Lantern Ring Rare is great because it's continuous. It's also a win condition. But it's continuous. It stays in the field to be dealt with. It doesn't just go away. The effect is persistent. Ring of Magnetism. Blast from the past there, right? It's a controlling effect. It's only as temporary as the monster or character, hero, what have you, that you play on it, it gets KO'd. Otherwise, it stays there. It can be a good control effect. So these cards work because they're persistent. There have been some basic action cards that have been good without being persistent. But I'd argue that's because they either win you the game or they have an ongoing effect on the board state. So Villainous Pact or the Front Line, those are win conditions right there. In fact, I know right now as I record this, there's somebody who's doing decent with Villainous Pact in Worlds. Awesome. Love it. Front line, win condition, well understood. These are one-time effects, but they're so darn powerful that they just win you the game. That's how you want to use them. Now, That being said, I would say that these cards are good in spite of being basic actions, not because they're basic actions. In fact, we've seen some situations where people did the front line and opponents, as the tournament went on, would realize, I can just use this too. Maybe they weren't set up as well for it, but that is a drawback to a card like that. Nonetheless, they work. Polymorph, and more modernly Mutation, was frequently used for removal, so a persistent impact to the board, or to get a recently purchased key piece, Jinzo, classically, onto the board without having to roll for it or wait for it to get through the bag on its own. So these are setup pieces for what you're trying to do. There are cards like that. But think about all of the basic action cards that we just haven't seen. Think about the amount of basic action cards that are brought to the table only for their globals and nothing else. So few of them have the ability to impact the board beyond one turn, but they have the same setup cost as a character does. Again, if we go back, Shield has the drawback of Blackbird because it's temporary, right? That's the drawback. Blackbird is available all the time to use, but it's a temporary effect. That's the drawback, is the temporary nature of it. And Shield also has the setup cost of Human Paladin, which is the drawback for the persistent ability. That doesn't work. So Shield has the worst of both worlds, in fact. And a lot of other basic action cards do as well. Same with non-basic actions. Why use Bat Signal when I could use Brainiac or Shazam, for example, if we're talking about the cards that grant range? This is why so many non-basic actions don't show up at all. This is why so many basic action cards are only used for the globals. This is why I often say action cards are a trap. Not always. We have exceptions that prove the rule, right? We went through several of them here. But this is why they are often a trap, and why it is usually a mistake to buy them, unless you know exactly what you're doing, and unless these cards have a way to either make you win the game or impact the board state beyond just the turn right now. Thanks so much for watching. Again, Dave, University of Dice, signing off. Look forward to seeing you soon. Do you agree with me? Do you vehemently disagree? It's okay. Whatever the case is, tell me in the comments. We'll talk about it. I try to follow the comments and make sure I reply to all of you who take the time out of your day to comment in the first place. You certainly don't have to, and I appreciate that you're choosing to spend at least a little bit of your time right here. Thanks again. We'll see you soon. Bye.